Welcome everyone. So today we will look at some variables as they're used inside blueprints inside of Unreal Engine. Now variables are very useful in terms of, so they're able to store data for us. So we can access the store data using the get variable, and we can set it using the set. So we can store the data using this value, and we can get the data using this value here. Now these are helpful because we can use these to reference any actors inside our scene, and also we can basically have lots of different types of them. So these contain very specific types, so each variable has its own type, and we will go ahead and look at the different types in just a moment. Now these can also be used to communicate between different blueprints, and we can also make them private or public. Private meaning it's only accessible inside the actual scene, like inside the blueprint, and public meaning we can access it from the world in the details panel. And in the next video we will look at some practical examples of these. To start with, I have split these up into 4 different sections, which I think make more sense together. So first of all we have just the object, then we have a lot of math ones, so these are mostly number related, and then we have the text, the name and the string, and the vector, rotator and transform, which interlink very much. Firstly, we will look at object. Now an object is something that we can use to make a reference to any of our world actors. This could be our camera, static meshes, AI, character. So this covers a whole range, and as I said, so we can set this, so we can set the actor down here, or we can get this, so we can get the stored data, or we can store the data using this one. Next we have a Boolean. Now Boolean was named after George Boole, the person that discovered this. Now Boolean only has a value of 0 or 1. So it just has a value of true, which is represented by a tick, and false, which is represented by an unchecked box here. You will often find yourself using a branch node for these. So a branch node basically has a true value, a false value, a condition, which is our Boolean, and something that triggers it. Once again, we will look at the practical examples afterwards. So now moving on to byte. Now byte is a number which has a value from 0 to 255, so a total of 256, where 0 is also considered as one of the main numbers. Now these are fairly good when it comes to memory use because they only use 1 byte, and it's still a big discussion. However, it tends to be better over network because obviously it uses less bytes to send it back and forth. Then we will move on to integers. Now these are basically use 4 bytes, but they cover a whole range of numbers, including negative numbers, whereas the byte does not cover the negative numbers. And these are basically whole numbers, and they do cover a very high range, so these are obviously a lot better to use depending on what values you need to get. Then we have an integer 64. Now this is the new preferred method. This covers an extreme range of numbers, but it's slightly more expensive on the memory use because it uses 8 bytes instead of the 4 and the one that we previously looked at. Then we have something called a float. Now float slightly differs because it actually allows us to have decimal places, and this can be very useful if you're trying to get an accurate value. Say for example someone's location. Now with a byte or an integer you can only have, say, a value of 10 to define their location, but in this you can specify if there are 10.7, 10.1 or 10.2. These of course are again slightly more expensive than bytes on the memory because they use 4 bytes instead of just like 1. Now we will move on to text. Now text inside of Unreal Engine, this variable is normally something that we will display forward to the users, and one example of that would be any of the widgets that you design or UI, so you can use this to display that text. If you guys do want to I did make a video on the NPC dialog system, and in that I use this variable, so you guys can check that out. Then we have another variable called name. Now name is something that every single object inside your scene, inside your world in the engine, has a name assigned to it. For example, if you just have a cube in your scene, Now you might name it cube, however the engine has a different name for it, so it might have a name something like static.mesh.cube. So name is something that is used to either assign the name to something or just to get the data for that. Then we have a string. Now string are alphanumeric values that are normally shown on the top left of your screen up here. Now this is something you will often use while testing, so you can convert most of your values, most of the variables into a string. So for example, if you have an integer, you would like to know what this integer value is. You can connect this up to a print string and then have that executed from something, and once it executes it will print the number up here. Or I often use it to see whether my my functions are actually working properly. So I will connect it at the end of something. For example, if I have a true and a false value, in the true I will say working, in the false I will say not working. So strings can be very useful for that purpose. Then we will look at vectors. So vectors basically have three different numbers, the x, y, and the z. Now these you will normally use, you will see them when it comes to RGB colors because they have three different values. So you can use these to set or get the value of a particular material. You can set them up in there. And we also have a rotator. Again, it uses a vector, so x, y, and z. So these are the three axes that it works around, and this basically is where you can assign this you can also assign negative values to, so negative or positive numbers to this. And lastly we have a main vector called transform. Now this actually combines three different vectors together in this variable. If you were to go ahead, right click this and split this down here, you will notice you will have a location, a rotation, and a scale. So a transform basically refers to the 3D aspects of your object inside the scene. So here you can basically assign whether you want to have something happen to it, or whether you want to change its location, get its location, or set its location. So now as we move on in the next video, we will go ahead and look at some practical examples of these. So thank you very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe and also check out my Patreon channel for more content. Thank you very much.